Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the breathtaking Dominicuskerk, and welcome to the John Adams Institute, Amsterdam's home for independent American thought. My name is Ian Kenny, and I am the executive director of the John Adams, and as my predecessor, Tracy Metz, has often said, that is a wonderful thing to be. Tracy, it's good to see you in the audience today as well. There's a saying that goes, history doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. In times as challenging as those in which we live, an age that often defies the grasp of language itself, it is good to be together in community, to delve into subjects that don't often make the headlines, but that do shape the ground beneath them. These are often questions of history, of culture, and of belonging, and these are things that touch us all. They're tricky to pinpoint because they operate on timelines far grander than our own. History echoes into the present and further still into the future. And questions of culture and identity matter more than the restricted airtime that we give them. And I was reminded of this fact this summer when I was traveling through the United States. I was on a cross-country tour with young European leaders, and for some of my colleagues, it was their first time visiting the country. In Washington, D.C., they asked, "What do we have to see before leaving?" And our hosts replied, "Visit the museum, the National Museum of the American Indian. Go to the Museum of African American History and Culture. Go because we do not know how much longer that they will exist as they are." It was pretty chilling to hear. For years, the US has been leading a reckoning, treating history not just as national pride, but as a source of knowledge, richer and more complex than myth alone. That season of honesty and reflection, at least on a governmental level, now feels behind us. These days, the headlines from the US are grim. The president installs himself on the board of the Kennedy Center. Federal officials will review Smithsonian museums for their patriotism. The executive orders issued by President Trump to, quote, restore truth and sanity to history. Diversity, equity, and inclusion programs are being dismantled across the country, and even teachers in some states are tested on whether they are true Americans if they dare to teach the full story of their nation. While shocking, none of this is new, though we haven't witnessed it on such a full-scale assault on history in our context or in our lifetime. But Egyptian pharaohs and Roman emperors practiced what historians called damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory, erasing names, chiseling faces, and reshaping the record to suit those in power. And this wasn't only about the power that they wielded over their present, but about the power that shapes the future. For when we strip away history, we rob future generations of the possibility to know themselves and where they come from in full. But history also shows us that when it is attacked, it's often the people themselves who come to the rescue. People like Jacob Lawrence, people like Nikole Hannah-Jones. We have the pleasure of working not only with Nikole on today's program, but also with the Kunsthal KADE in Amersfoort, who've just opened yesterday a major exhibition on the life and work of Jacob Lawrence, and it's on view until January. Born in 1917, Lawrence rose in prominence to become one of the most important American artists of his generation, and the exhibition at the museum that has just opened is a testament to that. Nearly 160 paintings and 70 drawings chronicle the breadth, the depth, and the scope of the United States through Lawrence's hand. Many people were introduced to Lawrence, as I was, through his iconic panels, the Migration series. Now, these were completed at the ripe young age of 23, and they chronicle the journey of Black Americans from the rural South up to the urban North. His vivid panels turned paint into an archive, and it preserved American stories that official histories had ignored. With a storyteller's eye for what needs to be shown, Lawrence turned canvas and paint into an archive of resilience. And like artists, journalists too are storytellers who speak truth to power. They are the people's historians, and that is why it is an honor to welcome back Nikole Hannah-Jones to the John Adams stage. Nikole is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, a MacArthur Genius Fellow, and the creator of the 1619 Project, a landmark initiative that reframed American history by placing slavery and its legacy at the center of the national narrative. She's been a staff writer at the New York Times, where, through her work on segregation and democracy, she insists that truth-telling is not optional. Indeed, Nikole says, if we are truly a great nation, the truth itself cannot destroy us. Because a commitment to the truth is the foundation of democracy itself, wherever you may find yourself. Today, Nikole will be joined by moderator Jennifer Tosh, cultural historian, public speaker, and founder of the Black Heritage Tours in both Amsterdam and New York. Jennifer is also a co-founder of Sites of Memory and a contributor to the Transatlantic Mapping Slavery Initiative. She has dedicated her entire career to uncovering hidden and forgotten histories, particularly those of the African diaspora, right here in Europe, as well as in the Americas. So after Nikole's keynote, she and Jennifer will discuss what is at stake when American history is weaponized against the very people that it has been designed to serve. We will then open the floor to your questions, and afterwards, Nikole will sign books, and they've been brought to you by our partners at the American Book Center. Even if you already have a copy of the 1619 Project or one of the other books on the table, please buy a book. Give it as a gift to someone. It's a very powerful gift that you can give these days. Because today isn't simply a debate about textbooks or about museums. It is a struggle over identity, over belonging, and about which stories endure. In this fight, art and historical truth aren't luxuries. They are battlegrounds. They are battlegrounds because they have the power to address pressing issues, start meaningful conversations, and improve our collective quality of life. So with that in mind, please join me in welcoming Nikole Hannah-Jones back to the John Adams stage.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ian, and the John Adams Institute, which has been responsible for the very first time I ever came to this country. And I also want to thank my very gracious host, the Corines. Did I pronounce that right? Corines? Okay, for hosting us this time. It's just been very gracious. So thank you all for coming out to hear what I promise you will not be an inspirational talk. These are not very inspiring times, unfortunately. So as I stand here in the Netherlands, I've been thinking about how this is a land that has also felt the weight of heavy histories. When my family and I first came here a few years ago, we visited some of the history museums, the Anne Frank House. We also visited the Slavery Memorial. We did the Black Heritage Tour. First we did the mainstream canal tour. And then the next time we came, I was really insistent that I be connected in with Black communities here in the Netherlands. And that's when we were able to take the Black Heritage Tour, which of course talks about how this city's wealth, like the United States, was also built on human bondage. And we did that because I always believe that it's an abdication of our duty as travelers, of our duty as human beings, if we don't confront the past wherever we go. On our last visit, my family and I were in attendance on Emancipation Day as the Dutch king apologized for the Dutch role in slavery and the slave trade. And in that moment, I was again struck by the interconnectivity of it all. Because here we were, descendants of slavery ourselves, who had traveled across this ocean, and we had traveled from a city in the United States that had been colonized by the Dutch 400 years ago under the name of New Amsterdam. And we were in a city that would see its first enslaved African in 1626, brought by the Dutch. And we live in a neighborhood in Brooklyn, may sound familiar, called Bedford-Stuyvesant. And Stuyvesant, of course, is named after Peter Stuyvesant, the last governor of New Netherland, and also one of the largest slaveholders in that colony, who was responsible for the massive growth of slaveholding in what would become the city of New York. And yet here we were all these centuries later witnessing this apology. And I thought, as I often do, that while many may roll their eyes at apologies and acknowledgments like this, that they actually do matter for a society that wants to be just and fair and honest, because our history is shaping us. Oftentimes it is warping us, whether we acknowledge that history or not. So this trip marks my third time in less than 5 years visiting the Netherlands. I have to say I didn't see that coming. And yet, this time, I come representing a vastly different country than I did on my first 2 visits. I come in the moment in the United States where our own heavy history and our unwillingness to grapple honestly with it is collapsing our democracy at breathtaking speed. We are witnessing what you all witnessed in the last century. People are being snatched off the streets and disappeared by agents of the state with no due process. There is a broad-scale attack on civil society, on the arts, on universities, on museums, on our national parks, on philanthropy. Our legal and political systems are also under attack as a strongman attempts to reshape this multiracial nation into one that is led solely by its shrinking white majority and that remembers just a single narrative that justifies it being led by a single race. As I stand here today, the United States is not at the brink of autocracy. We are, according to many scholars, some of which have now fled the United States, already in the midst of an early stage autocracy. And I would argue it's not early anymore. That in a nation that likes to brag that it is the oldest continuing democracy in the world, democracy is not holding, and there is likely tremendous suffering to come. You know, when I was young and painfully nerdy, and I know that's hard to believe because I'm very fabulous now, I had this very awkward obsession of watching Holocaust documentaries and reading history books on Jim Crow. I used to turn these questions over and over and over in my head. How did societies allow themselves to lose their freedoms? How did they allow such cruelty to be visited upon their fellow human beings? How did people voluntarily give up their own rights? I remembered in the documentaries and in the books, I would be fascinated by the still photos because that gave you a moment to pause and look in the faces and reflect. And I would look at those photos of people who are not the victims of oppression, laughing and taking their children to parks and going to the symphony and celebrating birthdays. And in those frames, those people looked good and they looked kind. And all the while, brutal acts were being done in their names just down the road. And I wondered how. How could people love their families and yet still abide such cruelty? I was particularly obsessed with the history of Reconstruction in the United States. And if you don't know about that period, I forgive you, not because you're an international crowd, but because we don't teach that history in America very well either. And we don't teach it very well for a reason. You see, the United States was founded as a democratic republic by landed white men who believed in democracy, but only for other landed white men. And since the purchase of those first captive Africans from a Dutch-made ship in the year 1619, race and racism has always functioned as the Achilles heel of my nation, because the people who would go on to import hundreds of thousands of Africans had no intention of granting citizenship to people who had been enslaved, and they had no intention that democracy would ever one day include them. And so at emancipation, the United States, the land of the free, I'm sure you've all heard of that, was actually home to the largest population of enslaved people in the world. And suddenly, having brought about the end of slavery by fighting the deadliest war in American history, the nation had to decide, well, what do we do with these 4 million people, these African-descended people, who are now suddenly free with no rights of citizenship and no legal birthright in their country of their own birth? And so briefly, the nation decided that it was going to attempt multiracial democracy to ensure that racial caste could never again force this nation to war, that racial caste would not tear this country apart. And that period was known as Reconstruction. And you've probably never heard of it because it only lasted for 20 years. So just a little math, and journalists are not very good at math, but I can do it a little bit. We had 350 years of slavery. We fought a war that lasted 4 years to end slavery. And then we tried to build multiracial democracy for 20 years. And it was this remarkable period in my nation's history because people who had just been enslaved a few years ago were now serving in the Senate and in Congress. They were building schools and attending colleges. The university that I now teach at, Howard University, was founded in our nation's capital, which was built by enslaved people, in 1867 to serve people who had once been enslaved. But the rot at the root was not so easily cured. And too many white Americans did not believe in multiracial democracy. And they had no intention of sharing power with those they considered to be their inferiors. And so within 20 years, that brief experiment with multiracial democracy was ended through a deal and enforced through violence. Black Americans lost nearly all the rights they had earned during slavery, including the right to vote, and Black Americans would be purged from Congress and most institutions, and democracy itself would not return to the United States for at least a century, even as America arrogantly exported the mandate for democracy abroad that it would violently suppress at home, forcing Black Americans to live under a system of racial apartheid. And if we're talking about the history of World War II, Black Americans have always disproportionately fought in the US military and came abroad to help liberate Europe and then came home to be lynched for daring to wear their uniforms back in the democracy of the United States. But it was fighting in World War II and experiencing some semblance of freedom here in Europe that made Black Americans go home and say, we will never live back under fascism in our own country again. Jacob Lawrence was born into that system. He would produce some of his greatest work under that system of racial apartheid, in spite of it, and also because of it. He studied this history that the mythology of American exceptionalism sought to erase. He understood, as so many marginalized people do, that what they call history is most often actually memory. Because Black people existed, queer people existed, indigenous people existed, they just were not part of the official story, the public memory that those in power wanted to put forth. Jacob Lawrence understood, I understand, that those in power control the past in order to control the present, and that authoritarian regimes almost always come first for the artists, for the writers, for the intellectuals, because of our insistence on challenging the false collective memory upon which power thrives. As a girl, I used to contemplate what it must have been like to watch democracy born and then watch democracy die, to watch industry and universities and lawmakers capitulate as they believed that if they sacrificed the most marginal, their own freedom would be preserved. I don't need to contemplate that history now to understand it, because I'm living it. I am a witness to it. I am a part of it, as we all are. And this is what makes history, accurate history, so dangerous in an autocratic society. I hope it bothers you a bit in your stomach to hear me now describing the United States as an autocratic society. I hope you take it as a warning. Because history and truth-telling about our past is an inoculation. Autocrats rise based on lies and distrust and a sense that they are the rightful leaders and only certain people should hold power. Understanding history means we understand what our societies are capable of. Because we live in denial. We believe we are good people from a good country and a just society. And so that blinds us to how even good people and just societies can allow horrific things to be done in their name. And so if we don't understand history and therefore don't understand what we're capable of, we are left unprepared to fight. Because we have failed to learn our history, or indeed failed to learn from it, instead of standing for the rights our forefathers and foremothers fought for, the United States right now is a nation awash in cowardice. Not just from the people we believe to be our adversaries, but most devastatingly, from people we believed to be our allies. We have witnessed capitulation, justification, an abandonment of the most vulnerable in society, a refusal to stand up for multiculturalism amidst the greatest attack on civil rights in a century, an acceptance of lawlessness in a society that said what made us superior was that we were a nation of laws. In America, we are witnessing a collective turning of our backs as we cast blame on those who sought to make our society more fair, who are trying to grapple with its history and injustices, even if sometimes that effort was messy and imperfect. For years, I've been trying to raise the alarm through my writing, through my public speaking, to warn us that we are still being held captive to the poison at our root, that we had to be honest about our past if we were ever to overcome it, that in America, racial injustice and democracy are antithetical to each other, that as long as we maintain the former, the latter was at risk, for multiracial democracy in America was not achieved until 1965. I don't care what the American propaganda tells you. When significant portions of your society have their right to vote brutally oppressed, you do not have democracy. And in fact, the United States did not gain democracy until 1965, after a bloody and deadly civil rights struggle, and with the passage of the 1965 Voting Rights Act that ensured Black Americans and other minorities the right to vote. And that means that while I look very, very young, democracy is only 10 years older than I am. A few years ago, I had the honor of sitting on a panel with 4 veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. Now, Mississippi, you may not know, is the state in the United States. It is the most heavily Black state in the United States, and therefore, it was the most thoroughly fascist state in America. Its Black population, which was majority Black, did not have the right to vote, could not go to white places of business, could not use the public library, could not use the hospitals. And this state of apartheid was allowed through violence. My father was born there. Mississippi is my ancestral land. And in the midst of all that horror, Black Mississippians were risking their lives, and too often losing their lives, to democratize Mississippi and therefore democratize America. So I sat on this panel with these veterans of that movement. And I brought my 15-year-old daughter who's hiding in the back because she's very tired of hearing me give talks. But this talk, I wouldn't allow her to stay in the back. Because this talk, I wanted her to understand and hear from the men and women who made her life possible. And so my daughter was sitting a few feet away, this carefree Black girl, and she was hearing the stories of men who were the same age as her when they had gotten arrested for the first time after deciding they were going to challenge the system of racial apartheid and were willing to give their lives if need be. I remember sitting there and looking at her, and then looking at them and thinking how short how very short was the distance between her freedom and their apartheid. And while I was up there, someone asked the panelists, well, how were you not afraid? How were you not afraid to stand up? And every last one of them said, what do you mean? We were terrified. Of course we were afraid. Our lives were in danger. But living as a Black person in Mississippi was already to live in a state of constant fear. And we decided we'd rather die fighting than submit to the slow death of taking part in our own oppression. And I was absolutely shook by that. All these years of studying this history, and yet it wasn't until that moment that it struck me. We've been thinking about courage the wrong way, probably because we haven't had to exhibit much of it. Courage is not the absence of fear. In fact, courage requires fear or it's not courageous. And so what we're all being tasked with doing is not to be unafraid, but to say being afraid is not going to stop me from doing the right thing and what I'm called here to do. So in a landscape of so little courage, I remind myself that I am the most profound testament to what my ancestors bore and what my ancestors built. I'm the granddaughter of Arlena Tillman, who was born on a cotton plantation in Greenwood, Mississippi in 1924 with no legal rights. My father was born in a cotton field because Black people, Black women were not allowed to give birth at the hospital there. She had a 4th grade education, and yet here I am, traveling the world and standing before you today. The span of one generation, which helps us understand that if that much progress can be made in one generation, it can also be lost. Many in my home country, those few who are privileged enough to do so, are looking to leave the United States right now. I can't tell you how many conversations I'm having with people, and many of them are considering finding refuge in Europe. I find that unwise. I find that cowardly. Because one, my struggle is with and for my own people, and I'm not going to abandon them, even though I have the means to do so. But also, Europe is not inoculated from the ghosts of its past. It is also struggling against some of the same forces that oppose multiculturalism, a multiculturalism that Europe is experiencing because of its own empire, that the people that built the wealth of your country and the other countries here now want a part of that wealth. And too many people want them to stay back home at the places where all of the wealth was extracted. The problems of multiculturalism in Europe are the problems of colonial empire. So this isn't a safe place for us either, just because we're not the victims of this particular empire. But even more so, the truth is, and this has always been the case, even if we do too often fail to acknowledge it, if some of us are not safe, then none of us are. We can flee to another country and not resolve the issues of our own, and those problems will simply seek us there. Because if democracy in the United States collapses, whether it's propaganda or not, the beacon of freedom across the world allows itself to succumb to autocracy, then democracy is safe nowhere. What happened in the Netherlands during the Holocaust is undoubtedly connected to what is happening in the United States right now. And if they come for me today, they will come for you tomorrow. And as much as we may resist this truth sometimes, history has shown that whether it is the undocumented immigrants in the United States, or the descendants of slavery in the Netherlands, or the Palestinians in Gaza, it is only in our collective and mutual struggle for liberation of all people that we ourselves sustain our own liberation. And it is only in our collective and mutual struggle for the liberation of all people that we all can be free. Thank you.
Oops. Wow. I don't even know. What did we talk about after that?
I know, it's all set.
Right? We're done. Exhale. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. Yes, let us pour ourselves a little bit of water. Let us take a collective breath. I feel the energy in the room. I feel the love also in the room. Many of my friends and colleagues are here, and I thank you for joining us in this important moment. We have a lot to talk about, and not that much time. I hate going on a script, but I know that if I don't, we will be here till the sun sets. So I'm going to do my best to stay on point. Ian is right there to watch the clock for me. And we're going to get right to the conversation. Nikole, I think one of the things that really resonates in what you said is the focus of our conversation, that right now history is under siege. That brings us to the sort of the theme about what does that mean? Textbooks, curriculum, museums are being weaponized. We know history is not neutral, and it's written and rewritten often to serve those in power. I want you to talk a little bit more about what's really at stake in these battles over memory and narrative.
I thought that was like a multi-part question.
No, let's go into one at a time.
I just want to say for the record, because we're in a church, I feel like it could have been some communion wine up here, but I'm just going to go.
Thank you.
Maybe someone could turn this water into wine, work a miracle, but we're going to go with the water. Okay. Always, love being in conversation with you. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this. The way that we know how important history is by the adversaries to telling it truthfully. If history didn't matter, we can look at the Trump administration, which the very smart people in media told us ascended the second time based on the economic anxieties of our country. That was never true. And we can see that by the economic policies he has not implemented since he came into power. But what he has done, rather than address, and there are massive economic issues in the United States. We have the greatest wealth inequality in the United States since the Gilded Age. The average worker cannot afford a 2-bedroom apartment in almost any city in the United States right now. So we have massive issues, economic issues. And yet, the opening months of the Trump presidency has all been culture issues. The very first executive orders that he issues were trying to make diversity efforts illegal. You should read his executive orders. They're actually amazing just to see the titles, like Bringing Sanity Back to American History. It's literally an executive order. So going after museums, going after curriculum, going after how our public parks explain history to people who go to visit monuments and museums. These have not been economic issues. So the fact that as he is trying to consolidate his power, Donald Trump has gone after culture issues tells you how important culture and cultural narrative is. That there's almost, in a society, nothing more important than the myths that the society tells itself about itself, because those myths justify power. So in the United States, the myth is we did do a little bit of slavery back then, but it was a long time ago, and it really didn't, it's just a couple backwards people in the South. And it has nothing to do with the larger society that was built. And so all of the inequality we see today is just a matter of Black Americans not wanting to take advantage of the greatest and freest society in the world.
Are you sure that's not the script from the Netherlands? I'm sorry. Did you just read something from our books? Okay.
Yes, well, one, we were founded by colonizing Europeans and enslavers, so we have some histories that are connected for obvious reasons. And so if you're telling yourself a different history, and why does it matter? History, narrative, memory drives policy. What policy do we vote for? What policy do we accept? What policy are we advocating for? And it can drive really progressive policy, or it can drive regressive policy. And if you are trying to, as we are, consolidate wealth amongst the oligarchy in the United States, then the history that is allowed has to be one that justifies that. If I could just close the loop on that.
Yes, go close the loop.
I'm the worst person to interview because you asked me one question, I will talk for the rest of the time. So I appreciate what you're trying to do. I would never want to interview myself, trust me. But I think it's so important because we tend to think of history as a side issue. Mm-hmm. But in no society is it being treated as a side issue. So when the 1619 Project published in 2019, when I tell you the collective power, the President of the United States was tweeting about it. The President of the United States created an entire presidential commission called the 1776 Commission against the project. There was 2 sitting senators, the Speaker of the House, Mitch McConnell, the Speaker of the House, and then a Senator, Tom Cotton, introduced the Saving American History Act to make it illegal to teach the 1619 Project in the classroom. This is the first Trump administration. So you saw then how important historical narrative is to power, because of all the things one would expect the president of the most powerful nation in the world would have to deal with, you wouldn't think it would be a single journalism project at the New York Times.
Were you surprised?
Of course. Of course. Because one, what the project does, it doesn't unearth new histories. This is established history if you are a history nerd. If you don't pay attention to history, this was probably new to you. But it's not even about the 1619 Project. What it is that saying that if someone is able to produce a counter narrative to power, and if large numbers of people start to grapple with that narrative, then that becomes very unsettling and dangerous to power. Because the root of what the 1619 Project was arguing is that our society's inequalities, which, by the way, don't just hurt Black people. You can look at what makes America exceptional. We're the most carceral nation in the world. Black people are disproportionately incarcerated, but most people incarcerated in the United States are white. We're the only Western industrial nation without universal health care. Black people are disproportionately without health care, but most people without health care in the United States are white. We have the highest rates of child poverty. Most poor children in America are white. I can keep going, right? So how do we both say we are the greatest country in the world and justify vast inequalities that also hurt large numbers of white Americans based on the myth of our exceptionalism, or the reality that a nation that would allow chattel slavery for its first 250 years, which is to say, you can do anything for profit, even own and sell human beings, that creates a form of capitalism that allows the type of inequality we have today. But why would power want you to think about that? Why would power want white Americans to also question the basis of their own inequality? And I think that is the danger of history, is that history exists, but if you don't learn it, it's like it doesn't.
Now, just curious, by a show of hands, how many people here are originally from the United States that are living abroad? Just to get a sense of our positioning ourselves here. And I have talked to so many of my friends and colleagues who are living in the U.S., who are waiting for this, living here, this collective exhale, waiting to okay, this cannot go on forever. the backlash, we're waiting for like, okay, at some point, somebody, Democrats, whoever is, on the other side of the aisle, is going to stop this landslide. What's happening that we can't see, the media does not show us? And we had this brief conversation yesterday about we're only getting the tip of the iceberg. What's still yet to come that we haven't seen?
I mean, one, I actually don't believe journalists should be trying to predict the future. So I can't say what is going to happen. I can say, though, we can look historically and draw some conclusions.
Okay.
So the arguments of the 1619 Project, the arguments that my journalism has been making for 20 years, is that you cannot have both racial inequality and democracy. And the reason that is that racism has been the perennial wedge in class struggles, in political struggles, that when power, and you've seen example after example, when most Americans are able to cross racial lines to see that they share a common struggle, right? That whether you're white or black in the United States, it is hard to make a living. It is hard to be able to buy a house. It is hard to have a quality of life. That when historically you have seen people of color across class lines align over their shared struggles, race has always been used as the wedge. So this idea that, well, the reason you're struggling is not the rich people on top, it's the immigrant who's coming across the border, who's stealing your job. It's black people who are lazy and don't want to work for what they have. And because racism is so embedded in our psyche, it rings, right? It rings true for people. So when we look at what's happening in the United States, the reason why you have not seen, I think, a massive resistance rising up is because Trump comes into power on the second time running on the issue of race, but not just speaking to his MAGA supporters, but speaking to a lot of white Americans who out of 2020 got tired, who thought, we're gonna talk about this race stuff for a couple months, and then we're gonna go back to normal, and y'all are gonna be quiet and get over it, who didn't wanna talk about transhumanity, who didn't want to have to grapple with new language, and so who were very tired that a 400-year struggle for equality could not be ended in 2 months of marching and you putting a Black Lives Matter sign in your yard. So his rise was abetted by white moderates. And frankly, Latinos as well, who we racialize as non-white, but who don't racialize themselves as non-white.
And boy, did they get the reality check.
They're getting it now. Oof. They're getting it now. But polling shows a lot of them still aren't, right? So because we haven't grappled with racial inequality, it has made our democracy particularly vulnerable to this moment. That has always been my argument, that whether or not you care that much about us, your inability to grapple with racial inequality ultimately is hurting yourself. It is ultimately making our democracy unstable. And so the only reason a society like ours can see this lack of resistance was so many people were a little bit relieved that Trump was going to come in and banish these things. They didn't want all the nonsense, but they were a little bit relieved by this idea. And so now that he came in this time, and they continue to underestimate him, right? There's this belief that Trump is dumb. I don't know if the man is intelligent or not. What I do know is he is an empty vessel. He has no ideology. So all you needed was a group of people who this time around understood that he was actually the vessel that they could accomplish everything they wanted. They came in with a plan. And that plan is being executed at record speed. And our vulnerability as a highly fractured society that is so distracted along racial lines that we weren't able to defend our democratic lines is how you get where we are. So I don't know where we're going, but historically, and I wrote, my last essay in the New York Times Magazine was called The Second Nadir. The nadir is that period after the fall of Reconstruction. And it was named so by the historian Rayford Logan because it was considered the lowest point in race relations or Black life since the end of slavery. And that's where you saw Black people disappear that I talked about. We're seeing that now, right? 300,000 Black women have lost their jobs, largely because they worked for the federal government, but also because Trump is attacking diversity programs. And whether or not we're hired under diversity programs, we're seen as being hired under diversity programs. So I think what we're going to see, I just said I'm not going to predict. I think what we could see is, a rapid consolidation of wealth, which we're already seeing, a loss of democratic rights. I worry that there will not be, there's so many folks who have so drank the Kool-Aid. Wait, Americans know about the Kool-Aid.
Well, there are lots of them here.
Okay,
So.
right. Who are so indoctrinated into the mythology of America that they actually think it is impossible for us to lose our democracy. And so therefore, a robust defense is not necessary because we are self-correcting. And I keep talking to people who are like, well, just wait till the midterms when they lose. It is highly naive to believe there is going to be a fair election at the midterms and that President Trump plans on facing, well, he can't face another electorate, right? But he is arguing that he has the right to run a third term. And we have a Supreme Court that is not making any of us confident that it won't be allowable. So I don't know that there will be a fair election at the next election. And I think the fact that he is bringing out National Guard and military in the streets is trying to normalize behavior that will likely happen during the election. So that is my fear, is that as, next year is supposed to be the 250th anniversary of the founding of America and so-called democracy, that we'll actually go back to our original democracy, which is a democracy for white people. You asked.
I did. I want to change lanes for a moment.
Okay.
Because you mentioned and we talked about the role of art, and Jacob Lawrence's exhibition, I think, is seminal here. If you haven't seen it, it's a must. History isn't only preserved in textbooks and classrooms. Artists have also always been historians of the people. So telling those stories that might otherwise be ignored, forgotten, or erased. And so this afternoon, we also want to draw on that inspiration. I experienced the exhibition at the Kunsthal KAdE in Amersfoort, also, who is here, I hope, is an exhibition at the church where we were, a beautiful exhibition. Are they here today? They are? Yes. Oh, there you are. Okay. We must acknowledge also that exhibition. I think what the question is what impression first did you have of the exhibition? What was your experience seeing Jacob Lawrence's work here?
So if you haven't seen it, it just opened, so I hope you will make your way over there. It was the first time I've seen such a large exhibition of his work. You really got a sense of the breadth of both his timeline of creation, but also how he was evolving and thinking about how he was going to present these histories. It was also a very unique experience for me because I couldn't read any of the signage.
You didn't get the English translations? Oh, somebody forgot to give you the booklet. Okay.
I didn't know there were English translations. But it was actually kind of great because I'm a person who tends to study the signage and then interact with the art. So for me to just be able to experience it for what it was without any sort of translation was very powerful. But I also was really struck by seeing this exhibit here. And understanding that such an exhibit in the United States, if it is going to be, particularly at museums that receive considerable funding from the federal government, could likely be challenged. That after 2020, we saw a wave of such exhibits, really centering Black American artists. And I was just talking to my good friend Wesley Morris, who's a cultural critic at the New York Times, that we're seeing like the tail end of that because, as you know, museum exhibits take several years. So we're seeing like the last of the the racial reckoning exhibits. Like in New York right now, 3 of our major art museums are hosting major Black exhibits. And I was like, the truth will be told next year, and the year after, and the year after, of who is able to be exhibited. And so I just was also thinking that if we were to try to travel this exhibit to the United States next year or the year after, it would be very hard to find a place, I think, now that would take it. And that speaks to how much we have changed in just 5 years.
Just to be able to share with you a little bit about, we're going to cue up one of the paintings. The first one, if you can see it. The first one is going to be about the migration series. No, not that one. Yes. Can you see it? The migration series. This is an opening panel during World War I, when the Great Migration North was part of your own family history, and many Southern African Americans. He was 23 years old, Jacob Lawrence, when he created this. It was among his most ambitious, I think, narrative projects. And I guess the question that I want to ask is, how do you see art, whether it's Lawrence or other contemporary artists, as a form of historical memory and resistance, of using art like this?
Oh, absolutely. So most of us don't learn history in our out of history books. And most of the history we know, we don't learn in school. We learn history through popular culture, right? People make movies. We learn history if you pay attention to who they memorialize with monuments, who they name buildings after. And certainly, we learn history through art. And I'm thinking about, the migration series was not like a retrospective. It is literally what was happening at the time and being ignored, and the stories of the migration were being shaped by white media and white Southerners who didn't actually like that their exploited labor class had agency and was using that agency to escape the South. My grandmother left with my father and his older brother and his younger sister in 1947 as part of this wave of 6 million Black Americans who fled the South, looking not just for economic opportunity, but democracy, and hoping to escape the violent feudalism of the South. And so what I love about the migration series is it is already shaping the history as the history is happening. It is already providing counter-narrative to, white Southerners were trying to say that they weren't repressive, that Black people didn't want to vote, that Black people liked living like this, that it was, only outsiders who were coming down and causing race problems. And yet, they are sometimes physically trying to stop Black people from leaving the South. There are stories of Black folks having to go to a neighboring town where the white people didn't know them in order to catch the train, because the landed people who needed them to pick this cotton didn't want the labor force leaving, but they also didn't want to treat them right, so they would stay. So he's writing, he's painting this counter narrative. So he's documenting a history, but also creating a narrative of a people and reflecting a narrative of a people. And that is what I find so powerful about that. And it's one of the reasons that Black Americans were particularly drawn to the migration series, because it spoke to their own personal histories. Every time you look at those paintings, you see your own family story and your own family striving. I don't know if any of you read, it's my favorite book of all time, Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns.
Yeah. Yes.
It's, to me, one of the greatest books ever written in America, and it's still on the, stays on bestseller lists all these years later. But what I told Isabel, what I thought was so subversive about that work was it placed the Great Migration, it placed Black people in the Great Migration in the classic immigrant tale of the United States. So immigrants are often used against Black Americans, right? I came here, my family came here with $7, and they managed to come here and succeed. Why haven't you? And so the Black American story has often been placed at odds with the immigrant story. But what Isabel Wilkerson's book does is it shows we too were refugees. I am the product of a Black woman refugee who left her entire family everything she ever knew, her own Southern culture, with nothing but a bag of fried chicken that her mother had fried for her because fried chicken traveled well, wouldn't go bad for a couple of days. And she knew black people would not be able to get off the train and stop and go buy food because we weren't allowed to. And she left with almost nothing and made my life possible. And yet we are never treated that way, as if we too were striving for a better life in this country. And so I feel like Isabel's work is a continuance of Jacob Lawrence's work, which is to give Black Americans our full humanity and our struggle its full due as part of a global story of people striving and leaving and setting out with nothing to try to make a way for themselves.
Beautifully said. Let's look at one more. The next one, A Plan to Escape by Harriet Tubman. Let's cue that one up. Yes. So this one draws on Lawrence's Harriet Tubman series from about 1940-41. And Tubman is presented as a leader, gesture, posture. You can see how she's positioned there. If we think about the landscape of danger, escape is visually represented. And after grounding in the large collective, the shift to an individual act is what's really, I think, profound about this painting for me. Lawrence said, "My pictures express life and experience. I paint the things I know and about the things I have either experienced or my ancestors." As a journalist, historian, how does this resonate with your own approach to storytelling? And especially now, I mean, this seems, the plan to escape, when we're talking about people, literally, I get calls regularly from my friends in the US saying, we're trying to leave because of the fear of what's happening and what might happen. How can we use this painting to speak to that?
Okay, so that just made me think about, the close of my speech where I said, we owe it not to leave, right? And so when I think about the framework of Harriet Tubman and the work that Jacob Lawrence was doing, is of course we tend to, we create, of course, mythologies about our heroes. And this idea, of Harriet Tubman kind of going and rescuing people from slavery, which is very true. But excuse me for cursing in a church, but I'm asking for forgiveness in advance. Harriet Tubman was a complete badass, like in every possible way. She wasn't a woman who just woke up one day and said she couldn't take it anymore. And she was a leader, but she also was a brilliant military strategist. And we never talk about that story. And the reason I bring that up, so Harriet Tubman was the first woman in the history of the United States military to lead a brigade. So she leads a group of troops, all men, to the Combahee River in a raid to free Black people who had been captured by the Confederate Army. Hundreds. She liberates hundreds, far more than the people she liberated on her journeys back to Maryland, which were mostly about her actually going to get her own family. And so what I think is important about that is she did leave. She got her freedom and safety, and then she kept returning. She kept returning for her people, and she fought in the U.S. military. She fought for the Union, and she was determined not just to get her people to safety, but to fight to bring down the very system that had enslaved them. And I think that is our work, and that's what's so inspiring. I remember a few years ago, this movie called Harriet came out. I hate that movie, I'm not gonna lie.
I have to agree.
I hate it. I'm thinking, you had this badass.
I'm sorry.
Right, exactly. You play, right, so the movie basically just shows that Harriet Tubman wasn't a brilliant strategist.
Yeah, they made her very passive.
She would just go into a spell and suddenly wake up free. Like, it was, every time when she went to rescue people, she would like black out in one of her spells, and then suddenly they would cross into freedom. And I thought, It really made me upset because it was a film made by black women, and I thought if anybody would do justice for the one time we get to tell the Harriet Tubman story, it would be that. But that has consistently been the way we have tried to remove agency from black people during the time of slavery, right? The way we talk about abolition is if there were no black abolitionists, right? There was no one who fought harder against slavery than people who were actually enslaved. Like, why should we have to say that? So his work returns us to our power and the agency of this brilliant woman. And I mean brilliant not because she had book learning. She was illiterate, as most enslaved people were by law, and yet had a brilliant mind and immense bravery. And his work speaks to that in a most powerful way.
Absolutely. Well, that's a perfect transition for the last one that we'll just take a brief look at, the Frederick Douglass. Painted in 1999, so this is later in Lawrence's life. Do we have that? No? She'll fix it. Well, I'll speak to it. It is a central figure about Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist, which we just mentioned about how important they are, black intellectual moral leadership. So what does these paintings demand for us today in this moment? What can we take away? If this audience gets to experience the Jacob Lawrence work and you're walking through it and you're thinking about where we are today, how can we use this as inspiration?
I think and I don't remember what year was this. Oh, this was his later work.
1999 when this was painted.
So one, if you don't know much about Frederick Douglass, please read all of his writings. He was, to me, the greatest American our country ever produced, hands down. There wasn't an issue that he was wrong on. He wasn't just an abolitionist. He was a suffragist. He believed in full voting rights for women. He opposed when the Supreme Court tried to say that Asian people could not be citizens. He opposed that. This man escaped from slavery, was a fugitive, and didn't just hide out, which would be the thing most of us would smartly do, but escaped from slavery and then went on the speaking circuit condemning slavery, knowing at any moment he could be recaptured. Self-taught, and yet I would dare you to ever try to write as brilliantly as he did. Was an amazing orator and was a truth teller no matter what it costs. One of my favorite things that I like to teach my students is Frederick Douglass was asked after Abraham Lincoln had been assassinated. He was asked to give a talk to commemorate the statue that was being dedicated in Abraham Lincoln's honor. Now, if ever a time to hold your tongue, you would think if you're commemorating a statue to a slain president. But Abraham Lincoln says, and this is when I was like, oh, this is about to get good. He opens it by saying the time is always right to tell the truth. And I was like, oh, they should have known better than to invite Frederick. And he goes on to say, he ended up being a great man, but for most of his life, Abraham Lincoln was a white man's president. And we were but his mere stepchildren. And every time he had the chance to act boldly and courageously on our behalf, he chose not to. And I was like, wow, that's a man I can admire, that no matter what, even if you're paying my check, I'm going to speak the truth. And so when I look at Frederick Douglass, who, his brilliance was on so many levels. He understood photography was invented late in Frederick Douglass's life, but when slavery still existed. And he understood how important the image would be to abolition. And so he, at the time, was the most photographed person, perhaps in the world. And we all know exactly what he looks like because he curated his image very intentionally, because he understood that the lens could be a powerful tool against those who tried to say black people were not human, were not worthy of dignity. And so when I look at the way that the power of Douglass is captured, and centering Douglass, it is continuing that insistence on being seen. There's no greater critique to me of America than the fact that a man like Frederick Douglass could exist.
Maybe there's some aspiring artists or some artists that are present with us. What can we share or say to artists who are inspired by Douglas's work or other works that speak to humanity and our shared histories. The importance of art in this time now, especially how, Donald Trump is trying to erase or to get rid of or to censor places like the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. What can we say to artists today?
I mean, like Nina Simone said, it's artists' duty is to speak to the times. I think that, again, there's a reason autocratic societies go after the artists first. Artists tell a truth that has no barrier. I don't have to speak academic prose to understand the truth that an artist is putting forth. They're able to offer a sort of critique that is shed of, being ostentatious. So I think art is so critical, and art can exist in the public in a way like what I write does not. If you put up a mural, right, or a banner or a sculpture, just like what happened in D.C. when they put the sculpture of Trump and Epstein holding hands, yes, right in front of the White House. That is a power that I can write 1,000 Trump Epstein stories and not move people to see that hypocrisy the way that single sculpture did. And I can reach a population of just people walking by. Again, this is why the war over truth is also outside. Like for instance, in Philadelphia, you all know about the Liberty Bell? I bet you don't know the story of the Liberty Bell, because who does? It's the Liberty Bell, so we think it makes us think about freedom, right? And it's also like this big, which is shocking when the first time I went to visit it. But what was brilliant in Philadelphia is, in order to get to the Liberty Bell, you were forced to go through an installation on slavery. Like, you cannot get into the Liberty Bell Center until you go through an installation on slavery. And man, was that pissing people off. I would stand in that line and watch people who were so upset. I just came here to learn about American greatness, and you are forcing me to grapple with the truth of slavery, and I am mad about it. Except you had to grapple with it even if you were mad about it. And now that history, that is coming down. So that's part of Trump's order, is that sites like that, that disparage America have to come down. So to me, then what is our role? Do we allow them to just remove it, or does the artist go and replace it, right? When they erase the, not the Black Lives Matter, but the Pride crosswalk, and artists came back and put it back. And then they erased it again, and they put it back, right? So to me, this is what we are called to do in this time, is to continue to speak out, and particularly if you are a Black artist or a member of a marginalized group. Because as I said in my remarks yesterday, I think that Black history by definition is political in the United States and probably across the empire, not probably, across the empire, right? Because our very existence as enslaved people gives lie to the entire mythology about America being founded on ideas of liberty. We're very inconvenient to that story, and so Black history is inherently political, and Black art is inherently political. And why should we want it to be any other way? So now is the time to create that art that both critiques what's happening, but also, far more importantly and far more worrisome to power, is it gives us a roadmap for a different future. It allows us to imagine what can be, and that what is not what has to be. So artists need to be creating, to me, now more than ever, and finding out ways to be more subversive with the art. And seriously, for everything that they take down, we should be putting up 3 things. That's my mandate.
Okay, yes. Thank you for that. Okay. The last 2 minutes that I have, I just think this is important because Faraji actually shared with me a New York Times article that just came out. So this is happening in real time. And the importance of the politics and the present, I cannot end this conversation without addressing this. In the last few months, Steve Colbert and Jimmy Kimmel's shows were canceled. Joy Reid's, the Readout Report, canceled. I think there is something that we are seeing from abroad, watching. What does it mean for American democracy when even comedy is being censored? Where spaces where truth can be spoken in playful but piercing ways are being silenced. The most recent article that Faraji shared with me, where Trump has called the European Union a foe, that we're all going to hell. So it's not just happening in the United States, it is reaching us right here. We have to call this out. How do we address this moment? What do we do? How can we support, collaborate, work together to deal with what's happening, not just in the US, but the effect that it's having on us living here as well? I know that's a lot to ask.
I have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
1 minute and 30 seconds.
To resolve these issues, but luckily for you, I don't have the answer and I don't pretend to. What I've been doing and what I've been telling people on social media and in real life is that now is the time for reading, that your education cannot come from social media.
Can you say that one more time? Sorry.
And I realize I'm not speaking to teenagers here. It's a lot of y'all old people. No, I'm playing. Right? I mean, in general, populations are not reading enough. We're not reading widely enough. As I was trying to understand what was happening in the United States, I realized, I study a particular type of history that I didn't know. What are the steps that happen in a nation when a nation is becoming autocratic, right? How does authoritarianism look? What are the signs in other countries? So I began to read much more widely, and I would just suggest that people actually get educated on what's happening, because we believe that our democracy is so strong, we don't know that we don't have to prepare ourselves for what it looks like when we're losing it. And so we're in denial. I've been reading, Jason Stanley on how fascism works. I know that Europeans know what fascism looks like. Americans do too. We just pretend that we don't. We don't call it that. But much of fascism was actually architected by studying what was happening in the American South against Black Americans. We just don't tell that story that way. So there's a great little book called On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder that I've been recommending. It's so easy. It's not very long. But not only does he tell us how to recognize it, but he gives us things that everyday people can do. Because I think part of the problem is it's easy to feel powerless right now. I certainly struggle with not feeling powerless myself. It's easy to feel like we don't have a say and everything is happening above us and there's so many different fronts to fight on that we end up not fighting on any of them. And so I'm just going to offer not my own advice, but what Timothy Snyder, both of those scholars have actually fled America right now, so it's probably not a good sign. But one of the things that he said is, pick an institution and defend it. That you can't fight on every front, but there's something that you have influence on, or the thing that matters most to you. The institution I'm defending right now and trying to undergird is the press. Right? I understand the media is failing in this moment, but it's also being targeted. It's capitulating, that if we don't have a strong press that pushes back, you don't have democracy. You can't have democracy without a free press, and you can't have a free press without democracy. So what is it the thing that you can do? Where can you defend and put your efforts towards that? And then if you're asked to pitch in on someone else's effort, pitch in, but you can't take on all of those things. Yeah, the main thing in this moment is they want us to feel like we have no control and no power. And too many of us are therefore preemptively ceding the power that we have. And just one quick example that we all just saw. They canceled Colbert. There was no big uprising against it. His show is still going off. They canceled Jimmy Kimmel, and the protest was immediate and loud and financial. Yes. All these people canceled their subscriptions to Disney Plus and Hulu, and that spoke And within a few days, he's not only back on, but he's back on all the stations that had said they were going to refuse to air him again. That shows you that we do still have power if we act swiftly and collectively, but too often we are not. So don't let them take your power. Use the power that we have to act collectively on behalf of the interests of all of us.
Thank you for that. On that note, you've given us something actionable. Thank you, Nikole, for your courage, your brilliance, for being present with us, for walking this journey with us. I think all of us are here. We're looking for inspiration, for hope, which you've left of humor, which you still have in spite of everything. So thank you for that. This is a moment where we want to open it to the audience. We have, Ina said, 3 questions. Now, make them count. I have some question rules. We're not here to get your side of the story, as much as we appreciate it. Your commentary, we would love to hear it. Maybe we'll find another forum for that. So keep respect of time. Your question has to be direct and a real question. So if you would come to the mic, if anyone has a question, nope, we're going to ask you to come to the mic because we can't hear you from there. And I am going to be very strict about the questions and answers of questions. So, sir, first give us your name and your question.
Thank you very much for.
I'm just going to slightly amend that.
Okay.
Sorry, Ina.
You don't want his name? Oh.
No, I do want his name. Okay. You can share a little bit about yourself.
No,
Don't go long, but I just always feel like, we asked you to come and listen to me speak for a long time, and then there's no exchange. No? Just a little bit?
No.
One sentence.
No.
Give us one sentence.
Hi, I'm Bob Covell. I live here. I'm from New York City. I live here already for 40 years.
Is that too much?
That's enough.
Is that too much, Ian?
That's good.
Okay.
That's good.
You had mentioned about the Supreme Court, and my question is, what do you think about the 9 Supreme Court justices, and especially Amy Coney Barrett and Clarence Thomas?
That's 3 questions in one.
No, that's...
So we're going to have to, that's boiling the ocean, and now we have to try to stir the lake.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a whole lecture. And I'm actually interested why you chose those 2 justices. What I'll say is this court, I believe, is likely going to go down in the history books the same way the court that decided Plessy v. Ferguson, which went down, and Dred Scott, as probably will be considered one of the worst courts in the history of the country. But even saying that, they are part of a history that they are largely reflective of, which is, for most of its history, our Supreme Court has not sided on the side of oppressed people. It has not expanded rights. It has not protected the rights of marginalized people. We tend to think of our court as the Warren Court, the court that, of course, issues the Roe ruling, that overturns segregation in Brown v. Board, that expands rights for prisoners and immigrants. That was a blip. And most of the history of the court is the court has been powerful white men who come from a high social class and a certain pedigree that have upheld the power of powerful white men. So this court is not actually, I think it's an aberration in how far and extreme it's willing to go, but it's overall not an aberration. And what I find much, much more interesting about the court right now is I'm studying the 3 dissenters. I'm obsessed with this idea of what it must be like to go onto a court where all you will ever do is write dissent. But also that I believe I am in my dissent writing stage of my career. That I imagine for the rest of my career, I also will only be writing dissent. And that dissent might feel like losing, but dissent is actually very powerful because dissent is writing for the future. And the ruling that turns over racial apartheid in the law in the United States, Brown v. Board of Education, was based on John Marshall Harlow's Harlan's dissent in Plessy v. Ferguson. So to me, that's what's much more fascinating to me is the idea, and Ketanji Brown Jackson and Justice Sonia Sotomayor, who the first black woman, the first Latina ever appointed to the court, are writing dissent that represent what I think is the future of America.
Good answer. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, let's reiterate. A question, one sentence about yourselves, your name.
My name's Elizabeth DeWitt. I'm from California, but I've been living here for almost 10 years now. I'm an artist. And my question is, how do you refill your intellectual cup amongst all the other things that you're wading through, writing these dissents and doing the good work?
Good question. How are you? How do you do it? And looking fabulous while you're doing it.
Well, shopping doesn't necessarily fill my intellectual cup, but it does fill a cup. Thank you for that question. My intellectual cup is always full because I have always been an extremely curious person. I'm fascinated by the world. I want to understand the world. And we have more access to information than at any period in all of human history. And so my husband will tell you my house is full of books that I haven't yet gotten to read. And I have 50 open tabs. He'll also tell you that because as an IT person, it's very frustrating to him that my desktop is so messy, both my literal and figurative desktop. So I'm just constantly reading, and I live in the end notes of whatever book I'm reading and realize, there's 200 other things I could be reading along this same subject. So that part is very easy. And actually, just being sustained for me is very easy because one thing, I'm always grounding myself in I am part of a tradition. If it's one thing that black folks know how to do, is struggle. I come from a people who have struggled, who have been defined by our desire to be free, and that we will continue to always struggle to gain that freedom for ourselves and for others. And so I have reminded myself constantly in this moment, I was having a bit of an existential crisis, right, around the period of the election, right? I'm actually interested in lots of things besides writing about racism, like interior design, a lot of things, fashion. And I was like, I've been doing this a long time. Maybe it's time to do some of the other things that I'm interested in because clearly I'm not going to abolish racism. So maybe I should try to move on to other things. Then the election happened, and I knew for such a moment as this, my entire career, I have been preparing myself for such a moment as this. And if I can't change a single thing in my society, I am determined to bear witness to it, to not let them in the future pretend they didn't know what they were doing and they didn't make the choices that they made, to not allow them to write us out of the history of this moment. And so I am sustained by the same sense of duty that called me to the profession in the first place. I know that history will say something about me one day, and it is that in this moment and in all moments, I was not quiet.
That's right. That's right. Excellent. Okay, our last question. Your name?
I kind of feel like that was the question to go out on.
That
but
was a good one. You better make it count. Make it count. Your name and just one sentence about yourself.
Okay.
And one question.
Hi, I'm Elise. I'm a student. I study North America politics. And I'm really interested in that question of how democratic institutions can fight back. And when you see that the Big Beautiful Bill has passed through Senate and the House, it is hard to see how we can fight within institutions because so many people within institutions, they get threatened if they resist, if they don't comply. So what would be your advice to people who are in these positions of power, but maybe fear for their personal safety or maybe for being fired of their job, their families? What can they do to not comply? I'm talking about also Republicans because there are people who were opposed to Trump and then complied. So what can they do to resist without being fired and then it's ended? Thank you.
Thank you.
What's your name again?
Elise.
Elise? I see you like fashion as well. You look very cute. So I actually think that's a great question to end on, because I don't feel like we can actually do both of those things at the same time. I don't think we can both say we're going to resist tyranny, but also say, but I can't afford to lose anything. This moment requires a willingness to sacrifice something. My husband would tell you, we've had many talks about the day when I say something or I want to write something that will not be acceptable to the people who hire me. And I know that that day is going to come. And I am willing and accepting that the day is going to come. So we want to both be on the right side of history, but have to sacrifice nothing to do so. And we all like to look backwards and say, well, during the civil rights movement or when they were, taking Jewish people off the streets, I would have stood up. It's easy to do that when you're only looking backwards. It's hard to do that when you actually have to do that. So when I talked in my speech about the story of these young men who at 15, one of them, the youngest one was 13 years old, decided they were going to challenge a system of racial apartheid in the South. Like, think about that. A little black boy who says, I'm not taking it anymore. Now, they were doing it because their parents were too afraid to. Rightfully so. The parents knew if they stood up, they would lose their jobs, they might get thrown off the land they were sharecropping on, and in Mississippi or Alabama, you could be killed. But the young people said, we cannot live under this system. We have to fight on behalf of not just ourselves, but other people who were too afraid to. And the truth is, people who fought in the civil rights movement, we tend to think about it as just, this is intentional, some folks who sat at a lunch counter and got ketchup poured on their heads. People were tortured and killed and disappeared. Fannie Lou Hamer, when she stood up, was thrown off of the land that was the whole livelihood for her family. So I wish I could tell you that there's a way to do this and not have to give up anything. But you don't save democracy by doing what's convenient. You save democracy by doing what's hard. And we are all going to be called, again, history is going to be written. What side are you going to be on when that story is told? What will history say about you? What sacrifice are you willing to make to do what is right and just and speak up for those who can't? That's the only answer that I have.
And that is the note we should end on. Thank you, everyone. Yes, please, we're going to take a selfie right now. Ovation. Look at that. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to Nikole Hannah-Jones. We're going to now give this moment to say how much we appreciate your being here, all of you for being here. Thank you to the organizers. I'm going to hand it over to you, Ian, for the last closing words.
You can stay there if you like. I'll be short. Yes, times are tough, to say the least. But for me, it is in afternoons like these that an important antidote to the growing darkness can be found. They are a glimmer of hope in and of themselves. Hope because the more that we understand and speak of the landscape around us, the better equipped we are to navigate it together. So remember, as Nikole said, courage requires fear for it to be courageous. And Nikole and Jennifer, thank you both for reminding us of the false collective memory upon which power so often thrives. And Nikole, warning received loud and clear. Allow me to briefly transport you elsewhere. Coming up next at John Adams Institute, we are thrilled to be welcoming the New York Times bestselling novelist Daniel Kraus. Daniel is the author of novels Whale Fall, The Shape of Water, which you may have recalled got turned into an Oscar-winning film, and most recently, Angel Down, a striking account of American soldiers in the First World War in France. On October 31st, he will join us to discuss his chilling read, Pay the Piper, a book that is itself a collaboration across time with the late legend of zombie fame, George A. Romero, and a most wonderful literary act of ghostwriting. The novel reimagines the Pied Piper tale as a haunting reckoning in the current-day United States as the nation and the novel grapple with history, with memory, with historic injustices, as well as what the past might demand from us in return. It's a perfect event for Halloween, and I think it's a great thematic follow-up for now, so please don't miss it. Tickets are available on our website. And events like these, like the one you are at right now, are only possible with the support of our community. Thank you to all of you here today for buying tickets, for sponsoring us, for supporting our work, and for lending your presence to this conversation. It's only through community that we can make a change, and I appreciate you all for being here and doing that. And a special thanks certainly to Anne and Wouter Corijn for hosting Nikole and her family, to Robert Roos and the entire team at the Kunsthal KAdE, and everyone here who donated art and worked on art projects that were part of that exhibition. Thank you as well for being here. And to our friends at the American Book Center for putting important books into your hands, including the 1619 Project, and if I'm not mistaken, On Tyranny by Timothy Snyder, who was a guest at the John Adams earlier this year. We're proud to support voices like Nikole's and Timothy's. And above all, I would like to thank our moderator and our amazing guest, Nikole Hannah-Jones, for returning to Amsterdam. The John Adams is fiercely independent, and we hope that you'll continue to stand with us as we bring consequential people right here. So if you would like to find out how to do that, visit the QR code over there. You can not only purchase tickets, but you can become a part of this growing conversation. Visit our website, support our mission, come speak to me or a member of our community after if you would like to find out how you can be involved. Because here in the John Adams community, there's always room for more. Thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and give it up one more time for Nikole Hannah-Jones.